no expectations or any indication that there was going to be any type of violence yesterday at the arena.
What was supposed to be a routine high school hockey game in Rhode Island turned into a scene of horror that no one inside the arena will ever forget. On a winter evening at M Lynch Arena in Pawtucket, families gathered in the stands to watch their children play, unaware that a private family conflict was about to erupt into deadly violence. In the middle of the game, gunfire shattered the noise of skates and cheers, sending players and spectators scrambling for cover. When the chaos ended, Rhonda Dorgan and her son Aidan Dorgan were dead, while 3 others, Rhonda's parents and a family friend, were left critically wounded. Police quickly identified the shooter as Robert K Dorgan, Rhonda's ex-husband, who died by suicide at the scene. Authorities later confirmed the attack was targeted, not random, transforming a youth sporting event into the site of one of Rhode Island's most devastating acts of domestic-related gun violence. The first shots echoed through the arena so suddenly that many people didn't immediately recognize what they were hearing. At M Lynch Arena, the sounds of skates cutting across ice and parents cheering from the stands abruptly gave way to confusion. Some thought a piece of equipment had fallen. Others assumed it was a firework or a mechanical malfunction. Within seconds, panic set in as spectators realized the noise was gunfire. Players on the ice froze, then scattered toward the benches. Coaches yelled for their teams to get down. Parents grabbed their children and ran, climbing over seats, ducking behind railings, and searching for exits. What had been a familiar, safe space, a community rink hosting a youth hockey game, became a scene of chaos and fear. Investigators later confirmed that the shooter had entered the arena carrying a handgun and went directly toward a small group of people seated together. This was not a random act. Police said the gunman's focus was clear and deliberate. Among those seated were Rhonda Dorgan, her adult son Aidan Dorgan, Rhonda's parents, and a family friend. They had come to support a younger family member playing in the game, an ordinary reason to be in an ordinary place. The shooter was identified as Robert K Dorgan, 56, Rhonda's ex-husband and Aidan's father. Court records and police statements later revealed a long, fractured family dynamic following the couple's divorce several years earlier. Authorities stressed that the attack stemmed from a domestic dispute, not from anything connected to the hockey game itself. Witnesses described seeing Dorgan raise the weapon and fire multiple times into the seated group. There was no warning, no argument, no chance for anyone to react. Rhonda and Aidan were struck almost immediately. Others nearby were hit as people screamed and dove for cover. The confined space of the stands amplified the terror, trapping families between rows of seats with nowhere to go. Several bystanders acted instinctively. According to police, at least one spectator attempted to intervene, rushing toward the shooter as others tried to distract or disarm him. Their actions likely prevented further loss of life. Within moments, Dorgan turned the weapon on himself, ending the attack. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Emergency responders arrived to a scene that officials later described as overwhelming. Victims were treated on the arena floor as terrified families were evacuated. Rhonda Dorgan and Aidan Dorgan were pronounced dead from gunshot wounds. 3 others, Rhonda's parents and a close family friend, were rushed to area hospitals in critical condition, fighting for their lives. As the arena was secured, the full scope of what had happened began to sink in. This was not just a shooting. It was a deeply personal act of violence that unfolded in front of children, teammates, and dozens of families. Many young players were ushered into locker rooms, shielded from the worst of the scene, but left shaken and confused. In the hours that followed, police held briefings to calm a stunned community. They emphasized that there was no ongoing threat. Investigators worked through the night, reconstructing the timeline and examining how the shooter entered the venue with a firearm. Authorities confirmed that the weapon was legally owned, though they declined to release specific details pending further investigation. Law enforcement also executed search warrants related to Dorgan's background, seeking to understand whether warning signs had been missed. As details emerged, the story drew national attention. News outlets across the United States reported on the attack, domestic violence in public spaces. Officials reiterated a familiar but painful reality. Domestic disputes can escalate without warning, and when firearms are involved, the consequences are often irreversible. Community leaders held vigils outside the arena in the days that followed. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes appeared along the fence, many from families who had been inside that night. Messages spoke of heartbreak, disbelief, and solidarity. Rhonda and Aidan were remembered as loving family members whose lives were stolen in an instant. School counselors and crisis teams were deployed to support students and athletes affected by the shooting. Psychologists warned that exposure to such violence, even indirectly, can leave lasting emotional scars, particularly on children who witnessed the panic or heard the gunshots. Parents were encouraged to talk openly with their kids and seek help if signs of trauma appeared. Law enforcement officials used the case to renew calls for awareness around domestic violence warning signs. They noted that while the attack itself occurred in a public venue, its roots were private. The tragedy underscored how unresolved personal conflicts can spill into public life, endangering not only intended targets, but everyone nearby. As the investigation concluded, police confirmed there was no indication the shooter intended to harm random spectators. That clarification brought little comfort. For those present, the randomness was not about intent, it was about proximity. Anyone sitting nearby could have been struck. Anyone in that arena was vulnerable. Could it have been prevented? Were there warning signs that went unnoticed? How can communities protect public spaces from acts driven by private rage? These are questions authorities continue to wrestle with, knowing that no single solution can erase the risk entirely. What remains undeniable is the loss. Aidan Dorgan and Rhonda Dorgan went to support a family member and never came home. 3 others carry physical and emotional wounds that will take years, if not a lifetime, to heal. And an entire community now associates a place of youth and sport with a moment of unimaginable violence. In the end, the tragedy serves as a grim reminder. Violence rooted in personal conflict does not stay contained. When it erupts, it shatters lives far beyond those directly involved, leaving scars that extend through families, teams, and communities alike. In the days after the shooting, youth sports schedules were disrupted, practices were canceled, and families who once viewed the arena as a second home were forced to confront the fact that it had become a site of trauma. For many, the silence around the building was heavier than the noise ever had been. Police briefings continued as officials clarified details and pushed back against misinformation spreading online. Authorities confirmed again that the attack was targeted, rooted in a domestic dispute, and not an indiscriminate mass shooting. Yet that distinction did little to ease the fear experienced by those who had been inside the arena. The randomness, from their perspective, was not about intent, it was about exposure. Anyone nearby could have been harmed. Investigators traced the shooter's movements leading up to the attack, piecing together how a private family conflict culminated in public violence. Court records revealed a long and complicated history following the divorce between Robert Dorgan and Rhonda Dorgan. Friends and relatives described years of emotional distance, unresolved resentment, and strained communication. None of it, police emphasized, justified what followed. Many young players witnessed panic firsthand, screaming adults, people running for exits, and coaches desperately trying to shield them. Mental health professionals warned that even brief exposure to such events can leave lasting effects, particularly for adolescents whose sense of safety is still forming. Schools across the district responded by offering counseling services, while hockey leagues issued statements acknowledging the trauma faced by players and families. Coaches were encouraged to talk openly with teams, to reassure them that their reactions, fear, confusion, anger, were normal. For some children, the rink would never feel the same again. As the investigation concluded, attention shifted to the 3 survivors who had been critically injured. Hospital updates were cautious and measured. Doctors spoke of surgeries, intensive care units, and long roads to recovery. While they survived the gunfire, their lives were irrevocably altered. Physical healing would take months, emotional healing far longer. The deaths of Rhonda and Aidan Dorgan left a void that words could not fill. Vigils continued, drawing hundreds of people, some who knew the family personally, others who simply felt compelled to show support. Candles flickered in the cold air, and handwritten notes spoke of grief, disbelief, and solidarity. Many messages focused on Aidan's youth and Rhonda's role as a mother and daughter, reminding the community that behind every headline were real lives cut short. State leaders weighed in as well, offering condolences and acknowledging the broader implications of the tragedy. While no new policies were announced immediately, officials reiterated commitments to addressing domestic violence and improving crisis intervention resources. Advocates stressed that warning signs often appear long before violence erupts, and that recognizing them early can save lives. Still, the Pawtucket shooting underscored a harsh reality. Even with systems in place, not every tragedy can be prevented. Domestic violence remains one of the most unpredictable and dangerous forms of conflict, especially when firearms are involved. The transition from private grievance to public catastrophe can happen with devastating speed. Community conversations grew more nuanced as initial shock faded. Some residents asked difficult questions about security at public venues. Others focused on the responsibilities of individuals to seek help rather than resort to violence. Many agreed on one point: spaces meant for children and families should never become battlegrounds for unresolved personal pain. The arena eventually reopened, though not without hesitation. When the doors unlocked again, the first sounds of skates on ice felt different, quieter, cautious, almost reverent. Parents watched more closely. Coaches checked exits instinctively. Normalcy returned slowly, layered over an unspoken understanding that something had changed. For Pawtucket, the shooting became a reference point, spoken of in hushed tones, remembered not just for what happened, but for where it happened. A youth hockey game, an ordinary evening, transformed into a moment that reshaped collective memory. In the broader national context, the case joined a growing list of incidents where domestic violence spilled into public spaces. Experts pointed out that while mass shootings often dominate headlines, many acts of gun violence are deeply personal in origin. The challenge, they argued, lies in identifying risk before it becomes irreversible. As time passed, media attention waned, but the impact remained. Families continued to grieve, survivors continued to heal, children continued to ask questions that had no simple answers, and a community continued to balance remembrance with the need to move forward. What happened at the Pawtucket ice rink was not just a crime, it was a convergence of unresolved conflict, access to a weapon, and a moment where restraint failed. Its legacy is measured not only in lives lost and injured, but in the lessons it forces society to confront, about domestic violence, about public safety, and about the fragile line between private pain and public tragedy. In the end, the story is not defined solely by the gunfire, but by its aftermath. The resilience of a shaken community, the grief of a family forever changed, and the reminder that violence, once unleashed, leaves no one untouched. If you found this story important and informative, please like the video, share it so others understand what really happened, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply researched, factual stories told with clarity and care.